We are very, very excited, and I've been looking forward to this panel. We call this How Better Corporate Allies Are Stronger Companies. This is going to be a very impactful, probably one of the best webinars that we've done. And thanks to our colleague, Rekha, who have put together just an incredible panel. Chris and I are going to do something we don't normally do. In fact, we never do, is turn over the reins of this webinar and the moderator role to somebody else. And but nobody better than our colleague, Rekha Chiruvolu, who is an amazing person, and I'm so glad that you're all going to get to know her today. I'll tell you a little bit about Rekha. So Rekha is a litigator. She actually serves a very important role in our firm. She's our firm-wide diversity and inclusion director, and she brings her career-spanning passion for diversity and inclusion in the legal profession to oversee all of our firm's diversity initiatives. She develops trainings and other programs featuring inspiring thought leaders and works with our firm's practice group leaders in recruiting, professional development, business development, to ensure that diversity and inclusion are woven into every aspect of our firm. And we're very grateful for that, Rekha. She's also frequently assists our clients with the development of their own diversity and inclusion programming, trainings, and related initiatives. And if any of you listening today or will be listening in the future, because we record this, so you'll have the opportunity to go back and look at it, are interested in talking to Rekha, I hope you'll reach out to Rekha directly or to Chris and I, and we'll put you in touch with Rekha. So with that, Rekha, I'm going to turn this over to you to introduce our panel. And I'm going to sit back, relax, and enjoy this. Probably as intended, I may even, in fact, switch off my camera. So Rekha, thank you.
Thanks so much, Phil. So I'd like to start by introducing our amazing panelists. So first, we've got Caren Stacy. Caren Stacy is the CEO of Diversity Lab. For more than 20 years, Caren has served as the head of talent for several of the world's top law firms, including Arnold & Porter, Cooley, and Weil Gotshal. After co-founding Lawyer Metrics to uncover the traits of high performers through Moneyball data analysis, Caren created Diversity Lab to focus exclusively on boosting diversity and inclusion in the legal profession. The lab experiments with unique and innovative ways to recruit, advance, and retain diverse talent through the use of data, behavioral science, technology, and design thinking. Welcome, Caren. Jhana Senxian is the CEO of the Guild. Jhana is a Harvard-trained social anthropologist and the founder and president and CEO of the Guild, a powerful model of public-private partnership and transformational urban sanctuary network and new business ecosystems. She founded in 2012. The Guild is a direct action network of intergenerational, people of color residents and their committed cross-sector allies and partners. The Guild network is composed of nonprofit and for-profit initiatives and entities focused on racial equality, healing, art, culture, stewardship, and development. With an established record of innovative collaborations and policy impact, the Guild is leading a fresh model of Black and Brown knowledge, asset, and opportunity creation. Welcome, Jhana. Laura Quatela is a Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer of Lenovo. Laura joined Lenovo in 2016 and is responsible for Lenovo's global legal affairs. Lenovo is a $45 billion Fortune Global 500 company and a global technology leader in driving intelligent transformation through smart devices and infrastructure that creates a better user experience. Laura is a member of Lenovo's Executive Committee and Diversity and Inclusion Board and has played a major role in developing the organization's diversity and inclusion efforts. Welcome, Laura. And Damon Hewitt. Damon is the Executive Vice President of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law. Damon is a longtime civil rights lawyer, a social justice strategist, philanthropist, manager, and coalition builder. Prior to joining the Lawyers Committee, Damon served as the inaugural executive director of the Executive Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. Before entering philanthropy, Damon worked for over a decade as an attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where he was lead counsel on litigation policy matters and supervised teams of lawyers and non-lawyers. He led pioneering efforts addressing the school-to-prison pipeline and coordinated litigation and advocacy efforts following Hurricane Katrina. Damon also served as executive director of the New York State Task Force on Police Shootings. on an entity analyzing police practices following the deaths of off-duty African-American and Latino police officers who were shot by fellow officers after being mistaken for criminal suspects. So welcome, Damon, and welcome to all our panelists. For our audience, if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to type them into our Q&A box. We'll try to get to them during the panel, but if we don't, we'll definitely follow up with you afterwards and make sure we respond to your questions. Now I recommend switching your view to grid view so that you can look at all of the panelists together as we engage in this conversation. All right, so let's dive right in. So the first question I wanted to ask is for Caren. Caren, many companies have put out strong statements over the last several months and gave a commitment to do more and do better with regards to racial equality and social justice. Can you tell us a little bit about what types of questions you're having with the companies about diversity and inclusion and allyship?
I can. And so in a typical lawyer fashion, I'm going to answer the question you asked, and I'm going to answer a whole nother question you didn't ask. So you asked the type of questions, but I think the type of conversations we've had about allyship, but I think the other important piece of this is the level of conversation and the amount of conversation. So, you know, having been in law firms for 25 years, I cannot count, even on one hand, the number of times proactively someone has come to me and said, how do I be an ally? Or as a corporation, how are we an ally? In the last 2 months, I'm well past all of my hands, my fingers, my toes, every appendage, and I'm thrilled to see that. In terms of the types of conversations, I would categorize it probably as 3 levels, Rekha. The first level is just understanding. And I think this is analogous to what you're seeing on the bestsellers list, right? So the New York Times is a perfect example. On their bestseller list right now, 9 of the top 10 bestsellers are about race, race relations, racial justice. Before the unfortunate events, none of those books were about race. And I think there's a clear desire on the part of hopefully not just Americans, but others to better understand. And I think we're seeing that. I would say the next level of conversation that we're having is acknowledgement and empathizing, right? And this is where we're starting to see more protests. And it's not just Black Lives Matter with Black lives protesting for Black lives, right? We're seeing white allies and LGBTQ plus allies and everybody kind of in this 360 helping each other. And we're also seeing corporations acknowledging and empathizing. And I think, Rekha, to your question, that's the majority of the statements that have been made. They've been about denouncing racism. And actually, and you know, I'm a data geek, so I will tell you that we ran data on the Fortune 500 and on the American Lawyer 200, right, which are the top or the most, you know, highly revenue or highly profitable corporations and law firms. And if you look at the Fortune 500, for example, and in particular the Fortune 25, half of the statements are about awareness and empathizing. The other half of the statements are the third level, and this is the most important level I think about allyship, is taking action. And so it's interesting to see some of the corporations say we denounce racism, but there's no actual action associated with the statement. But there are a couple, right? So we're seeing Goldman Sachs, for instance, is going to stop participating in IPOs for corporations with all white male boards. That's a great action, right? It can be measured. And I think that's really the third and the layer that makes me the happiest is to see allyship actions taking place that are measurable and accountable and transparent. And I will, just as a bit of a plug for the AmLaw 200, when we ran the data for them in terms of their statements, a quarter of the statements are around empathizing and acknowledging, but a good majority of the statements have actions associated with them. And a lot of it is donating money, but I'm hoping they get not only that action done, but they also start to take some personal action around this too. But I will tell you, I'm optimistic based on seeing the level of conversations we're having in allyship at each of those 3 levels that I mentioned.
That's fantastic to hear. And thank you for the data. Always appreciated.
Can't help myself.
Yeah. Laura, the next question is for you. So there are so many reports about reinforcing the notion that diverse companies just perform better and they're stronger organizations. How have you seen that ring true with Lenovo? And tell me a little bit about what you're doing to continue your ongoing commitment to building a more diverse workforce and the impact Lenovo hopes to have on the current movement for racial equality?
So I doubt any of us can answer the question whether a brainstorming session or a decision-making forum is not made better by a diverse set of perspectives in the negative, right? We've all experienced the richness that diversity brings to the conversation. One of the reasons that I decided to join Lenovo is that we're a company of 60,000 employees we speak 100 different languages. Our managers are 97% native residents of the 180 markets we serve. So diversity surrounds everything we do. Every conversation we have is a diverse conversation with a variety of perspectives. For 2020, we make public our diversity commitments and our performance. And in 2020, our commitments focus on the executive population. We will be at least 20% female globally and at least 28% Black, Hispanic, African American, or Black, Hispanic, Asian in the U.S. We assure these commitments are achieved by establishing KPIs for any off-track organizations, requiring a diverse set of candidates for any hire, and matching our talent pipeline with executive sponsors who can assure their visibility, career guidance, et cetera. We've implemented several programs under this umbrella that I'm proud of. I'll highlight one, which is called Diversity by Design. And in that program, we diversity test our product offerings during the commercialization process to assure that we deliver on our promise of smarter technology for all. And by that, we mean access and ease of use by everyone.
Great. That does sound wonderful. So the next question I have is for Jhana. Jhana, you have over 20 years of professional perspective, from the local to the global and across sectors, on research and action related to so many social justice and power issues. What do you see as unique or interesting about this current moment for the business sectors?
Absolutely. So my work has been involved as being an anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, looking at paradigms of major cultural shifts from communities to private and public sector entities. And we have seen moments where a global response to the desire for corporations to be better citizens, better social citizens, better environmental citizens has come up before. So as a business analyst for sustainability and corporate social responsibility, I got to work with over 6,000 mostly private sector and public sector entities as they started to do that analysis on their internal operations, their supply chains, as well as how they're engaging with communities. And it was very clear from the data at the time, and it continues to be borne out, that companies that have authentic and thorough, sustained action around good environmental and social issues have a competitive advantage. You know, consumers want to work with them. Supply chains are more loyal, more productive. So we know that this is a benefit. I think this particular moment is special, both for some negative things and for the positive things that are coming out right now. So on the negative side, we have the pandemic with its disproportionate impacts on Black and brown communities. And we also have the social injustices that are now being able to be instantly seen, shared, and responded to on multiple levels. And we've seen this impact not just communities here in the U.S., and as we're saying here, not just Black communities, but this has had a ripple effect and has really touched a nerve across multiracial communities, intergenerational communities, and it's also touched a nerve, importantly, globally, where it's resonating, where we're all starting to understand and imagine how to have a better society and what concrete actions our public sector and especially private sector entities are going to take to back up statements and to communicate, collaborate in new ways, and really have a sustained commitment to these issues. So that seems to be a special moment and a special opportunity for particularly bold, direct, and committed action. So it's a hopeful moment, but we need for the hard work that's going to come after with the action and for the discomfort that's going to come after, because we are all in uncharted territory, and we are, in effect, trying to create systems and institutions that reflect that diversity of experience and need. So.
Thank you. Excellent point. One thing we really try to make clear is that this is uncomfortable, and that is intentional, and that's okay. And we all just need to lean into that. Yeah. So, Damon, I wanted to talk to you a little about what you've been seeing. So, Lawyers Committee is on the front lines of the fight for social justice and racial equality. Have you noticed a shift in the type of engagement that you're seeing from corporate America specifically to your mission?
We have. I mean, first of all, they're coming to us. You know, I think that that's not novel, to be clear, but the volume and the clarity with which I think some corporate partners are coming to us is very important. You know, I think some of the changes I've seen are that, number one, racial diversity among all different forms of diversity, which we want to make sure we kind of harvest all of that and take it in. Racial diversity, to be frank, sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. As well, this is one of many forms of diversity. It's important, but it's one of many forms. And I think there's a kind of a clarion call not to prioritize racial diversity over other forms per se, but to make sure that there are specific plans and certain degree of intentionality about racial diversity internally, but then also in vendor networks, supplier networks, what have you. I think second, there's also a question or development with respect to this notion of broader corporate citizenship. You know, I think that with the economic downturn and COVID and the awareness of racism as a pandemic itself, I think corporations have to navigate through such volatile headwinds, right, that impact bottom line, impact shareholders, even those that are publicly traded. For mid-sized corporations, some of them have to navigate that as well. And so I think the idea is that, look, we're all in this together in some way, shape, or form. And no matter how much diversity we have internally, which is obviously important and a huge first step, and not easy step at that, we also have to think beyond our borders, so to speak, beyond our visible and invisible networks. So I think that's very important. And then just finally, this moment has given, frankly, license, mandate, and cover for corporations to have clearer, more articulable plans as to what does the stand mean for us. And sometimes what I've seen is that those plans include leveraging kind of the corporate brand, so to speak, in service of broader movement. And I think that's just so important. You have your fiscal capital, you have your human capital, you have your reputational capital. And the notion that corporations leverage reputational capital in service of civil rights or racial justice agenda, it's not brand new, but I think we're seeing it in more profound ways now.
And so how have you as an organization been tapping into that? Like what are you asking of these companies for your organization?
Well, I won't say that we have it perfect, that we have kind of a standard that if you want to give us money, you have to do X. That's not how we proceed, of course. But we have had the great benefit of engaging in thoughtful conversations. In fact, the volume is a lot actually for us to manage. Corporations, they quite often want help or advice, and we're not necessarily ones to give the specific consultation. There are certain outfits that are set up to do just that, but we are certainly happy to help direct people in the right corporations in the right direction. And we also, frankly, have talked about beyond the financial transaction. What does this mean? Encouraging corporations to talk more, be more introspective, but also be more vocal about what it is you have done, what it is that you're worrying through, right? That you're navigating through, because none of us, including nonprofit organizations, have this perfect. But we all have a learning edge, so to speak, to be clear about that learning edge, but then also to have a sustained commitment that can extend beyond the tenure of one CEO, one chief diversity officer, what have you, that it's such a fabric, part of the fabric of the corporate structure, of the corporate imperative, that it's just as important as a profit margin, which is a controversial thing to say, tough to make real, but that's the highest aspiration. Those are the kind of conversations we've been having.
That's really wonderful, and I'm glad that they're increasing their engagement at this time. It's important.
Right.
So, Jhana, we've seen a lot of framing of this racial and social justice moment, and I'm going to say movement, in terms of the moral and ethical. What are your thoughts on this framing, and how should the private sector engage more?
Yes, I think that the moral and ethical framing has been extremely important for a good percentage of folks out there. It has moved people to action to realize I can't stay silent, I need to speak up. Clearly, it has moved a lot of corporations to issue statements and to start thinking about real action, putting concrete moves behind it. That is important, but it has to be more broadly embraced, more holistically embraced, because as we think about these things, the folks who are going to want to be, quote unquote, on the right side of history, or who want to, share something of a legacy for their children in showing up in the social justice moment, need to also be, let's say, multilingual and flexible and really being able to understand how to shift the conversation. This is not about doing something nice for certain communities because, things haven't been great. This is really about how to become better companies, how to become more reflective of the society in which we live, how to become the type of place that people want to work, people, with whom they want to partner, how to think about this as and be able to speak to your different stakeholders who are going to need to understand it from the moral to the business and at every other level. So the idea that diversity for some may be embraced as let's get some different faces in the seats, right? And that's just not enough. It has to be also about how do you actually look at the culture of your company and understand what culture do we have now? Who's here now? How have we acquired the folks we have now in all the myriad of ways, that happens? And then also, how do we create an environment that is welcoming, inclusive, and supportive for flourishing for all types of people? I think to Damon's point, it resonated with me when it was mentioned that sometimes the racial diversity issues can kind of be put on the back burner in service of other things. And so it has to be looked at holistically about these initiatives need to not just be about a distantiated group, has to be about the overall benefit to an organization as a whole. You have to start asking yourself questions. Are you tapping all of the genius of the collective, of that diverse, powerful collective? Are you able to connect with your constituents wherever they may be, right? So it really is about building relationships. And I believe that this is now a time and a place where companies are going to make space and can make space for the relationship building. I believe companies need to be in direct relationships with communities, right? And so as we're partnering, think about partnership in different ways. How do you tap into what's going on? What are the needs, the assets, and opportunities? And how do you become an ally for the long haul? How do you sustain that connection and really build upon what communities that sit in the middle of the challenges, what innovative ideas are coming up from there that you can be supporting to actually make change? And the beautiful thing about it is not only will that feel good on a moral and ethical level, but it's also going to pay off for the organization as a whole. In research that I've done previously on sustainability and corporate social responsibility, it always came up that having that good corporate citizenship, brand associated identity meant that your cost of talent acquisition goes down, the cost of retention goes down. People are willing and interested in putting more passion into what they're doing because they feel aligned with a company that reflects their values. So I think it's important that companies don't think of diversity issues as something done for a particular group, but as something that actually makes society, market, value, all of these things better for everyone.
100% you're right. And, thank you for sharing some of those concrete things, because I get that question a lot about what can I do? What can I do? And I'm always saying, first start at home. First, look at who you are, look at your culture, look at your people before you're trying to put all these fixes in place, because a lot of self-reflection is an important starting point. Yeah, thank you. Caren, going on that point, so many of these companies want to make this meaningful impact both internally and in their communities. They're all gung-ho about getting out there and doing something. So what advice have you been giving them? Because you're one of the organizations that people come to for guidance and advice and training. So what have you been saying to these folks?
Yeah, so I think, and this dovetails a lot with what Damon and Jhana said, but these statements, I fear, could be considered one and done. And this is not a moment, right? This is, it has to be a sustained commitment to systems, to what Jhana said, right, to fairness and equity. And it's not about how are your Black people doing or how are your LGBTQ people doing. It's about, this is your universe. Does everybody have fair and equal access to getting hired at your company, to getting promoted at your company? Do they feel like they belong and want to stay? And that's true of your brown and Black people, but it's true of your straight, white, able-bodied dude as well. And I think Jhana made a great point about being thoughtful. Although, Damon, one of the things I think we see when people say diversity, they sometimes look at that under a big tent. And they say, well, we have a lot of diversity. And we'll say, okay, well, do you mean straight white women? Because that's what, when we run your numbers, that's who you seem to be leaning on in terms of your diversity. What does that look like when you start to think about how many Asian people you have or how many gay women you have and the intersectionality among the groups? And I think, Rekha, one of the things that we've said is exactly what you've said, right? If you've just made a corporate statement that is outward-facing, please have your next statement be inward-facing. and if you've just made a statement that's inward-facing, please have your next statement be outward-facing, to Damon's point about broadening into the community. And then the second point we make is, and you know what? Bring other people into the fold. So one of the things that the CEO of SurveyMonkey did just yesterday was they made an announcement that he was going to call 20 of their top vendors, right? This is, supplier diversity has been in place for a long time, but it's rare that it goes outside of procurement, and to the CEO of the company calling the top 20, right? Showing the importance to him personally and to the company as a whole. But he didn't stop there. He brought in another 20 companies whose CEOs are going to do the same thing. So because I'm a data person, right, 20 times 20 starts to have a pretty major impact. Calling 400 vendors and telling them that this is important and talking to them about what you're going to measure for years to come is incredible. And then the last and final thing I would say, and I do think this is, I'm just echoing my amazing panelists, but there's got to be a level of sustainment to this, right? You can't say I'm giving $1 million to the Equal Justice Group or to whomever and you're not done. That didn't create fairness in the community in itself or by itself. It didn't create fairness in your organization in and by itself. So what are you doing to commit long-term, to sustain efforts, and to change your systems so that they're fair, and not just talk to your people about fairness, but look at your underlying systems that have that unconscious bias potentially baked in?
Absolutely. And, I think everybody talks about the importance of measuring, and you're a data person. Like, we need to start with knowing what we look like and actually look at the data itself. And it's uncomfortable to look at your data. Those are hard facts, right? But it's a starting point for internal self-reflection that can be really impactful.
It is. And Rekha, just to hit on that point for a second, when we talk about diversity, a lot of times we talk about headcount. Like, how many humans are we talking about? But inclusion is measurable as well. Right? So if, for instance, in a law firm environment, if your white, straight, able-bodied dudes are working with other white, straight, able-bodied dudes, and they're not working with other people who don't look like them, there's not inclusion going on in the work assignment system. And we can measure that and see that happening. We can also ask our people, do you feel included? Because even though I can measure it, 9 times out of 10, they feel excluded, and we'll tell you that too. So they're two perfectly great measurements of inclusion that we should be looking at, in addition to how diverse are we as a people or as a headcount issue.
And that's a great point. I think one of the things we always think about is that you can't measure inclusion, right? That it's hard to know how people feel, but just by virtue of asking that, you're actually moving that along. Yeah. So Laura, I have my next question is for you. Will you tell me about some of the challenges that Lenovo has been facing as an organization and how you've approached it as an organization on the inclusion front?
So I'll direct my comments specifically to racial tensions in the U.S. Lenovo serves two very different worlds. We're a company founded in the East, in China, significantly comprised of Western components, so businesses purchased from IBM, Motorola, and others. And so both Eastern and Western cultures influence us. But one perspective doesn't necessarily always fully understand or align with the other. When George Floyd was murdered, like many other companies, we wanted to do two things primarily. One, serve our employees and understand their concerns and fears and help them, but also to contribute to social change. So at the same time that was happening, China was enacting the national security law in Hong Kong. So we had two employee sets who were experiencing very different things, sort of in the same social justice movement context, but very different things. And then within the US, we had employees protesting, and we had employees whose family members were serving law enforcement. And so what we realized very quickly was it was necessary to listen, provide a mechanism for employees to tell us what they needed, not for us to assume we understood what they needed, but to let us know of their different needs, disparate needs, and then just to engage the two groups in very powerful conversation. So we began that in June. We've continued it. We will continue it, I hope, for a long time to come, because those conversations have been extremely meaningful. We also decided that rather than writing corporate checks, we would empower employee-driven philanthropy. And so we multiplied our match by 5, and we asked our employees to contribute to what mattered to them. And believe me, we were very close to writing 2 big checks, but we thought, no, this shouldn't be us directing this. We really need to empower employees to make their own choices and decisions to represent the fact that they were all coming from different perspectives and experiences. So I guess I would summarize that, Rekha, by saying our challenges really our power lies in our diverse perspectives, but our challenges lie there too. And so we often have to stop ourselves and stop solving for things and invite our very diverse workforce to help guide the way and tell us what's important to them.
Absolutely, thank you. And that's a great point about listening. I think everybody, as I mentioned earlier, people want to do something, but I think the starting point is really listening to the constituencies, because that goes to the economics of the organization. I think retention, recruitment, all that stuff plays into this. So you want to make sure people are feeling heard. So, Jhana, my next question is for you. So your current work as the founder and CEO of the Guild is very interesting. And what ways have you built your organization to manifest the values that you're talking about? And in what ways might the private sector engage with organizations like yours to be good allies while building the strength and the brand of their own companies? So how can that collaboration be tightened?
Absolutely. So the Guild is, I like to call it a platform, really, for creating systems change from the community level in partnership with cross-sector allies of all types. So health systems, community development banks, whatever the case may be, where the opportunity is. And we focus on concrete quality of life changes across urban landscapes or the landscapes where our residents live, our POC residents live. So we're multi-sited, focus on systems change, and so we hold a big umbrella for a lot of different activities that go on that focus squarely on disparities. So we have a lot of health disparities out there, and so we partner with systems to work on health disparity, addressing, getting solutions right from the community. So we create sanctuary networks where people can come together to not only heal and take on wellness challenges that they have, but also to build capacity, get training that leads them into becoming, pipelines of opportunity to different companies or industries or sectors. So we're really going to the communities where the challenges are the greatest and recognizing the talent, strength, and power that's there right now, even with the disparities that we're talking about and the inequities. Again, a lot of the best ideas can come from the folks who are having to manage around them and deal with them day in and day out. And so the Guild is really a platform for that. So we are very much looking at partnering in new directions. So technology platform development, fund development, training opportunities, development, different ways that we can create bespoke approaches to the challenges that we face. And that is something that has changed policy here in the city of Boston, and that is scalable and attracting a lot of interest in having both the venue for people to come together and for communities to do the work that needs to be done internally and at those levels to build the skills and to have access to different networks and horizons of opportunity. And so those are the types of things that we look for partnership around. And again, it's a one step at a time building of a relationship for the long term.
And have you seen new engagement with new organizations reaching out to you in light of the current movement?
Absolutely. And again, the confluence of the pandemic with this social justice moment means that previously, and a couple of years ago even, as we were talking about the need to lift up and surface Black and brown voices in the creation of solutions as equal partners in those kinds of approaches and actions, that was considered a little more radical in a lot of ways. Now, this particular moment has caused the phones to really start ringing as, again, healthcare systems, development, strategies, and status quo behaviors being questioned. People want new solutions, new ideas, and this point of co-creation, the importance of we are all going to be co-creating the solutions and the systems that we want to see in the world. Community is very often not at the table. That happens in a realm of expertise and outsider, status institutions, and then things are brought and presented to community. And so we have been able to be a platform for direct engagement in communities as creators of knowledge around issues, as the designers and builders of new systems and solutions. And that we've gotten wonderful support from the city and, state levels. And so that needs to continue in partnership with, the private sector is going to be a great help to all of those efforts.
That's true. So important. Caren, I'm going to come to you next. So I want to switch gears a little bit because I think one of the things that we really need to also mention is that a lot of the great stuff we've been doing around diversity and inclusion didn't just start the summer of 2020, right? We've been doing a lot of good work leading up to what we're doing now, and we're still continuing to do work we started prior to the social justice movement. And one of those examples, and it's a little self-serving because you and I work together quite a bit on this one, is the Move the Needle Fund. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little, and then I'm going to also bring Laura into the conversation. Talk a little about what the Move the Needle Fund is and what prompted you to develop it. So what was your hope with it, and how is this a different initiative than things that you've worked on and developed in the past?
Yeah, so I look at this through the lens of the legal world because that's obviously where I sit day in and day out. From a work standpoint, I also happen to be married to a lawyer, so it's where I sit day in and day out from a personal standpoint as well. But having spent 25 years in this environment, we have made progress on diversity and inclusion, but for a lot of people, including me, it hasn't been enough progress and it hasn't been fast enough. And so you all know the definition of insanity, right? So we could just keep doing what we've been doing and we could make that same incremental progress. But I'm a big fan of wanting to see the law represent the world before I die. So we really need to we need to speed this process up quite a bit. So the idea behind the Move the Needle Fund was we often work in silos when we talk about diversity and inclusion, right? One law firm will work within itself or one corporation will work within. But we don't do a lot, and this was to Jhana's point, of the community building around diversity and inclusion. And so the thought with Move the Needle Fund was, what if we brought competitors in to work together? What if then, in addition to 5 law firms who are competitors, we said, hey, what about your clients? Because oftentimes you talk to your clients across the table about diversity and inclusion, and for instance, right, Laura will tell you, legal departments look at law firms and say, you need to do better. but how do we work together to do better, right? Because as Laura will tell you, a good number of her lawyers probably came from the big law vendors that she's working with and for. And so if law firms aren't diverse, then it's likely that you're not going to have a pipeline of diverse individuals into legal departments either. So the idea, Rekha, was, what if we put 5 really thoughtful, innovative law firms together and asked them to collaborate? And then what if we brought in 30 of their clients and asked them to collaborate? And then what if we brought in another 25 community leaders who could see some of our blind spots, right? Because as law firms and legal departments, we have a certain mindset and a certain perspective. But what if we brought in a CFO, a financial person? What if we brought in a nonprofit leader? What if we brought in a racial justice leader? What if we brought in, and so we did that. And so the idea behind the Move the Needle Fund is, if we put the right people in the room, if we put some money into it, $5 million over 5 years, and if we put transparency and accountability and metrics around what we're trying to accomplish, that it would have the change that it hopes and expects to see. So each of the 5 firms, as Laura knows, because she sat in the room and listened to their early goals, have set pretty aggressive diversity and inclusion goals. What do we want to look like, and who do we want to be in 5 years? Because you measure things you care about, right? If you care about profitability, you don't say we want to be more profitable, you say we want to be 100% more profitable, or whatever it is. If you care about marketing, you say, well, we had 2 hits to the website this week, I'd really like 4. So we asked everybody to tell us who they want to be, and then say that publicly. And as Laura knows, and Rekha, you know, that was really hard to get everyone on the same page inside the organization, and then to be public about their goals. And now we're really, I thought we were going to do the hard work by changing systems. Setting the goals was hard work. And now we're working on systems, right? So are our performance reviews fair? Are our hiring methods fair? Are our work assignment systems fair? Are how we promote fair? And the answer to those questions in a lot of instances is unintentionally no. And so how do we change those systems so that they are fair? Because one of the research pieces of intel that we have and have seen firsthand is that you can't bring a bunch of people in a room and train them to not be biased, right? I can't say, okay, Christopher, stop doing that. Damon, start doing this. Jhana, start doing this. And you're not going to walk out of that room and do whatever it is differently or better because you're more aware. It doesn't create long-term change. But what does is, if, for instance, in an interview situation, we take the names, right? We redact the names from the resumes. We see, right, that we get a much more diverse group of individuals who apply and get through that first stage of the process, versus telling the human who's reviewing the resume to do something different and better. And so we're testing all of those things. And luckily, Nixon Peabody and 4 other firms have not only agreed to test these research-based and social science-based system changes, but they've agreed to tell everybody what works and what doesn't work, because we should also be learning as much from our failures as our successes. And you all know, right, when a law firm or a legal department does something well, they all put their peacock feathers up and say how great they are. But we've asked these law firms and these legal departments to take down their feathers and say, this didn't work. If you were going to do it this way, or don't do it at all, right? Because we don't want you wasting your time for the benefit of your people, right? This is about your people. So Rekha, that's in a nutshell what it is.
Yeah, and we've been working for the last 8 months now on a lot of these things, and it's been really eye-opening to learn from the mistakes, from the slip-ups, from the failures. Which I'm still not sure I'm entirely failures just yet, but
Right.
Learning to evolve and to grow from that. So that's been really interesting as well.
Rekha, could I just chime in for 1 second?
Yeah.
I think, Caren, you just hit on such an important point, because I think so much of it goes to definition and setting goals. And it's also really important in all this to set goals for what fair is and what fair looks like. And fair is not, a certain percentage of X, Y, or Z, but it's making sure that your process yields the result where the people, regardless of any extraneous factors, have the opportunity to maximize their potential in your organization and achieve their best selves, and thus be the biggest assets for the organization. So I think, a lot of people have gotten hung up on sort of a subjective definition or a definition that in some instances has conscious or unconscious bias about what fair is, but really framing fair in a measurable way, I think just necessarily yields a better result for the individuals involved, but also, again, makes a stronger organization as a result.
Absolutely right, Chris. Thank you. Laura, tying into that, I want to hear your perspective on why you decided to sign on to and participate in the Move the Needle initiative, and share with us some of the things you've thought about it.
Yeah, that's a good question, Reagan. I think it's kind of instructive when you think about the myriad initiatives and organizations that a corporation particularly can align with. How do you make that decision? And Move the Needle Fund for us was a very easy choice. First of all, Caren had a track record. So she has a rich track record of driving diversity successes in the legal profession. And one of those recent ones that's quite visible is the Mansfield Rule certification program, which goes to the diverse slate for every hire concept that I mentioned earlier. Second, we knew the Diversity Lab, with its track record, was data-driven, as are we. So, we've all talked about data. In my mind, if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. So knowing that we would be approaching things from a data-rich perspective was really important to us. And then, Move the Needle is directed to collaboration between law firms and companies, as Caren described. And I just see that as hugely rich and fertile ground. The collaboration between the two, you would think occurs naturally because we have an economic relationship, but that's not necessarily true. At the same time, I think both sides see tremendous potential, particularly with younger lawyers coming up, and what we can do together that is more powerful than perhaps acting independently. I will tell you that the week, and I love the story of the week, I don't think I told Caren, the week we decided to commit to Move the Needle, my head of litigation, who's a Hispanic woman, and I received a pitch group from an AmLaw top 20 law firm that was completely homogenous, male, Caucasian. And she and I were aghast. I have been practicing for 38 years, and I remember thinking to myself, really, 38 years later, we're still grappling with this. So the opportunity to sort of work in an innovative environment, which this is, so Caren describes a laboratory where we will experiment, sometimes we'll fail, sometimes we'll succeed, really appealed because that's what we do as a business proposition. So again, very, very easy decision.
Thank you, Laura. Yep. So Damon, I want to come back to you. So for companies that want to be allies in this movement for racial equality and support the Black community across the country, what are some of your recommendations on how they can be more than just performative allies? That's a big thing where we're really concerned about that.
That's right. Well, you've heard so much already, and there's a lot to take in. But I think I'll just draw some concepts, and maybe we can all get more specific together. One is just listening. I think that's important because without assuming that we get it, that you get it, what have you, humility as a value I think is very important. Showing up and doing so consistently. Actually, you can't be an ally if you don't show up, and you can't be an ally if you're not consistent, if you're inconsistent rather. So I think that's also very important. Thought partnership and thought leadership within your industry and sector is also important. And I think what I and others alluded to earlier about using some of that reputational capital and also using all your full auspices. So the funny thing is the financial contributions are the easy part right now. Every corporation has something set aside. Sometimes they've gone the extra mile and doubled down and, expanded, just like, public charities and private charities have doubled their payout at times to nonprofit organizations. But that's actually not that should be sustained too. But the harder part is to lend all different parts of your platform. What if all of your instrumentalities in your organization could somehow be in some degree in service of a diversity mission, of a racial justice mission, especially in a moment like this? You have in-kind resources and capacity. You have physical space, which is more complicated than ever right now. Of course, you have online platforms. So just think more globally about how you can partner. So I think that's a fruitful way to think about it, but then also identify through mutual, conversation and agreement, actual organizations with which you will partner. It's tough because you may not agree with every tactic, strategy, policy, platform of every organization, but you can find a comfort level, right? You can find a comfort level with some, and so you can talk about how to broaden horizontally the number of relationships and type of relationships you have, but also to vertically deepen those relationships. So you go way beyond the transactional. And I think over time, when you are with those partners, when issues happen, like if you had a partnership before George Floyd was killed, and that caused a new awakening in this country, think about the possibilities that you could have had or that you did have if you had such partnerships already, right? I think most of the corporations on the line have some kind of partnerships, and that's the first place you turn, your existing partners. So it gives you a chance to really deepen over a sustained period of time. So there is, there's certainly lessons learned along the way about what goes wrong and what not just trust building, but maintenance and sustaining trust looks like. Mm-hmm. But it's really about being there and staying connected and not shying away when things get difficult and being willing to deepen as needed.
Thank you. Those are some great tips. I think that's a really great starting point for a lot of organizations. Thank you. Jhana, sort of tying into what Damon had said, what is your advice for companies that are perhaps committed yet new to engaging in these issues, or quite frankly, just afraid to get things wrong? How should they approach this journey of being good allies in social economic justice issues? You're on mute.
There we go. Okay. This is a moment for authenticity, right? Really a lot of internal soul searching and understanding of who you are as a company. What are those goals that are going to be shared values across the organization? Again, the listening can't be overemphasized here as well, all along your value chain with your stakeholders. And again, relationship building authentically with communities, I think, is going to be really key. And so really understanding where are you today, those internal cultural assessments that were talked about already, being courageous and comfortable with discomfort. I mean, these are things that have been said, but they are so key and really need to come back to them because in moments of transition, things can get really scary and dicey internally and externally in those conversations. So we're all building new tool sets as well as our own capacity to engage across sectors, across cultures, or what have you. So thinking also about the wellness and the need for healing work to happen along this journey, because we're talking about deep and entrenched histories, experiences, and as Laura brought up, sometimes very dramatically different painful experiences that people are going through within your community of stakeholders within your companies. And so you got to figure out how are you going to hold space for that side of the transitions, right? It can't just be programs, policies, tasks, actions. It really needs to also be, we're dealing with human beings that need support, that need to understand where they are, that are going to be shifting around in how they feel, and thinking about how you're also partnering around the wellness of your people is going to be really crucial, especially, executive leaders who have to bring ideas, implement them, measure them, and communicate them. There are a lot of extra pressures out there right now, and how you hold community, I think, needs to be an important focus.
Thank you, Jhana. Thank you so much. That's really important information. Well, I think we're out of time, so I'm going to toss it back to Chris Keith. Thank you so much to our panelists. And I know we didn't get to the question, but I think we'll follow up afterwards to make sure we get that answered. Chris?
Thanks, Rekha, and thank you to our panelists. I think so many organizations and so many individuals are late to this conversation. But that doesn't mean that we can't all be part of this. We have to all be part of moving this needle forward, changing this dynamic, changing this conversation. And I am, hopeful given what we've heard on the call today and all the good ideas that have been expressed, and the report from the field, that there seems to be a groundswell and some momentum in this moment that hopefully will be the thing that differentiates this moment in time from other moments of time when we've had the unmet, where our actions and our consistency and our persistence, haven't effectuated the change that we all need as a society. So, we deeply appreciate all of you being here with us today, and for all the folks who've joined us today, we hope that you can take away some things to think about and pursue within your own organizations. And I know that, anybody on this panel would be happy to be a resource for you and follow up in that regard. So in addition to the tremendous program that we've had today, this is one in the latest of a series of programs that we've been holding across many areas of interest. We have our next program coming up on August 18th, where we'll be joined by Francis Kelly, who's the head of the Government and Public Affairs for North and Latin Americas at Deutsche Bank, to discuss public policy impact and coronavirus pandemic issues around the U.S. and global economies. We will be back for our NP Connects program in a couple of weeks, talking about how to think about your brand and continue to have your brand established and grow in this time of turbulence and upheaval in financial and supply chain markets. We'll be joined by Larry Golko, who will help with that conversation, give a presentation in that regard. Larry's a well-known person around town from a consulting and CEO and branding perspective. Finally, if you want to access previous recordings of our prior programs, you can do that at our website, nixonpeabody.com. You can also sign up for a variety of alerts and our mailing lists at nixonpeabody.com, and access a number of other pieces of content on this and other important topics. So again, we thank you all for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing as many of you as are available in a couple of weeks. Thanks again, everyone.